First, I'll give a little background. I'm female, and growing up, I lived in a terrace house in a very small town in North England. While it wasn't the nicest part of town, drugs were a problem, and for a short while, a pedophile lived on my street that once locked 2 young teenage girls in his house. But that's not my story to tell. I generally felt quite safe. My mom was, and still is, a worrier, and has always drilled stranger danger into me growing up. This happened when I was around 7 or 8. A school friend came to my house to play on our rollerblades while we sat there on the pavement outside my house, directly underneath my living room window. We were strapping up our skates when I noticed a scruffy-looking man walking down my street with something in his hand. As I said, it wasn't the nicest of areas, and this wasn't necessarily unusual. So I carried on with my skates. As the man reached us, he began to slow up, looking right at us. This made me feel a bit uncomfortable, but I put my head down and carried on. My skates were a nightmare to put on. So many straps. Once he reached about 10 foot from us, I started getting really scared now, trying to catch my friend's eye for help. My friend hadn't noticed him up until this point, as she had her back to him. Only when he spoke did I look at his face. I don't remember much about him other than his lips. They were horribly chapped and cracked. I remember that I was surprised that he could speak with such sore-looking lips. He mumbled something about chocolate, and held up a crushed-looking Easter egg box. I remember thinking Easter was ages ago, so it must have been quite old, and moved closer towards us. My friend had now noticed him, and shuffled along the floor to me, looking a bit scared herself. I shook my head and said, "No thank you," assuming he'd ask a question. I was a polite child, even when I was scared. He continued to move closer, still mumbling about giving us chocolate, until he was only a few feet from us, towering over us 2 small children, while we slid backwards trying to keep away. At this point, my dad had seen him through the living room window and popped his head out to say, "Hey, what are you doing?" The man looked surprised and mumbled, trying to sell chocolate." My dad, who can be a bit intimidating, simply told him to piss off. "We don't want any." With that, the man shuffled off, turning his head to stare at us while he did. Safe to say, we didn't play out on our rollerblades that day, and just stayed indoors. Maybe he was just a druggie trying to sell chocolate for drug money. Or maybe not. I'll never know. I grew up in a small town in Canada. There wasn't much to do. At the time, I was dating this guy who lived in the middle of town after school. We would always just walk around and try to find things to do. On this particular afternoon, we were walking a short distance from his house to go to Walmart to get Xbox Live points. I was quite the gamer back in the day. We're in the sketchy part of the neighborhood, almost at the Walmart, and we see this man in his white van parked beside the sidewalk and an old couch on the side of the road. Presumably someone had left it out for someone to take it for free. We were on the same side of the road as this guy, who creepily stared at us while we were approaching him to walk past. The guy was probably in his late 50s, and was average height and fairly scrawny, wearing a stained wife beater and thick, ripped snow pants. Keep in mind, this was mid-July, and I, being in high school, was wearing shorts and a fairly low-cut tank top. I dealt with anxiety all my life, specifically regarding weirdos like this guy, and I was praying that this man was not going to talk to us. Sure enough, as we got closer, he steps out in front of us. His expression almost immediately turned from extremely creepy to overjoyed when he exclaimed, "Hey, would you two mind helping me hoist this couch onto my van roof?" Now, obviously I just wanted to continue walking past this random guy without saying a word, but my ex-boyfriend, being the guy that he is, agreed to help, despite me clearly hinting that I just wanted to keep moving. At first this guy seemed okay. However, our encounter dragged on for longer than I expected things to, and things got really creepy. I remember him asking if I wanted a soda or some popcorn, and that he could just run inside the house to get some. This was very odd considering he parked out in front of a complete stranger's house. He also asked me to get some tools out of the back of his van, which I obviously never did. Anyways, The whole process of lifting the couch just seemed to drag on. This guy clearly had mental health issues. It was very sporadic. He was also jumpy, and it was going on about the most random stuff. At one point, he even gave us an email and asked for our phone numbers and contact information. About an hour and a half later, though, we are almost finished, and this guy starts talking about this weird ritual that him and his friends have where every year they hike up this mountain wearing giant peacock feathers, cut their wrists, and make sacrifices to God, and that we should join him this year. Writing about this now makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. At this point, we're like, screw this. Finally, we were about to leave when he pulls out a camera and asks to take our picture. He said that he wanted to keep the memory of us forever because we had been so helpful. Stupidly, we were too shy to say no, and I didn't want to anger this volatile weirdo. Keep in mind, I'm a 15-year-old girl wearing a push-up bra and a low tank top. We eventually left, feeling totally freaked out and bewildered by this dude, and ended up calling the police later that day, who interviewed us. Apparently, there were multiple incident reports involving this man in Toronto for similar situations, and he was actually wanted by the police for abducting a young girl around my age. When they showed up to his property, they found it completely abandoned. So this guy was clearly selling old furniture for money and living in his van or something. I can't help but think this creep still has my picture somewhere. I still have this guy's name burned into my memory, just in case it ever happens to me. So, mentally insane, sadistic homeless man from my hometown, let's not meet. Before I say anything, yes, we did talk to the authorities. And no, they did not do shit. Well, they did do a little bit, but they never caught the guy. Anyway, I'm 26 female, but I was 7 when this happened. I lived in the sketchier part of town, in an already very sketchy place. We don't live in America, and the police will only bother when they need to arrest us. I live in a shack, hardly even a house. My mom cheated on my dad, and for some reason, he stayed with her. Since I'm not my dad's child, my parents really don't care about me. It all starts when I had just turned 7 and playing in my front yard. This car pulls up and a 40-year-old man pulls up. He rolls up slowly in front of our yard. He asked where my parents were, and I naively responded saying that they were working. What he doesn't know is that my older sister takes care of me mostly when my parents are working multiple shifts. He asked me how old I am, and I responded with 7. He also asked if I could come closer for a moment, saying that he needs help with something. My older sister always taught me to be polite and helpful with my parents, or other adults, so I took a few steps further. My sister then bursts out the door and scares the living shit out of this man. He peels away down the street, and my sister lectures me about talking to strangers. God knows why I was so gullible, but my friend was at my house. We were playing a game, can't remember what it was exactly. The same man pulled up and asked me for a picture of me and my friend. He calls us beautiful, saying that we look like models, and he works for a place that could make us very famous. In a 7-year-old mind, it doesn't count as talking, and he says that he can promise us a big future. That means a lot to me, as I was very poor at the time, and anything risked that could provide for a better future was worth it. He left finally. A week or so later, I'm walking home from school, and the same car was going by very slowly beside me. The man rolled down the window and offered me a ride. I contemplate this, knowing that I could get home faster, and I actually had never ridden in a car before, not that I can remember of. Deep inside, something is wrong, and I happen to reject his offer. He gets out of the car in a more threatening tone and demands that I get in. This scares me, so I start running. I ran through backyards, hopping fences. I know the man knows where I live, so I knocked on my neighbor's door. The man pulls up in front of my house and looks around in my yard, trying my windows and doors. I explain the situation to my neighbor. He nods and goes out the door with a gun and has a talk with the man. After that, I never saw that man again. So, creepy guy taking pictures of me and following me, let's not meet again. When I was 8 or 9 years old, we got a West Highland Terrier puppy called Meggie. I'd always wanted a dog, and was so ecstatic when I finally got one. I lived in the perfect area to take her for walks as well. Some suburbs in the north of England. A small farming town surrounded by fields and woods. My best friend at the time was a boy called Mitch. He was the same age and lived 5 streets up. We would hang out most days. Well, one day, Mitch and I decided to take Maggie out for a walk on one of the fields close to my house. It was a large open farmer's field that joined onto another field, which joined onto a motorway. It was on a warm summer's day, really warm, one of those really bright English summer days. So we got the leash on her and made our way into the field, doing a loop around it and then making our way back to the path that leads on to the housing estates where I lived. As we were nearing the path, I saw a scruffy, unkept looking old man on one of those older style bicycles, the ones with a basket in front and thin tires. Well, he spotted us as well. 2 young blonde boys walking out on the field with a puppy. As soon as he saw us, he stopped and looked at us for a little bit, maybe 30 seconds, then got off his bicycle. He rested it against a fence that ran across the side of the field. He then proceeded to slowly walk towards us, keeping his eyes drawn on us the entire time. As he got a bit closer, I noticed that he was also smirking. I still remember that ugly face of his. White, long, scruffy hair appearing from underneath a tweed flat cap, a white beard covering most of his face. But for some reason, I can remember that smirk on his face to this day. I told Mitch to stop. He was oblivious to the man, but I knew something wasn't right. My parents warned me about men who do bad things to little kids, and I just had a bad feeling about this guy. I think due to the fact that he didn't take his eyes off us once, and he was just smirking the entire time. So there we were, stood completely still in this field as he lumbered towards us. I had no idea what to do, so I just said let's walk this way, sideways across the field, so he wasn't coming directly towards us. As we started walking across the field, he changed direction, the same way we were going. I knew then that this wasn't right. I felt genuine panic for the first time in my life. We walked slowly across the field, and then this guy slowly, still following us. He wasn't running, never even picking up the pace, just casually walking towards us. And then that miracle happened. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, appeared from the side of the fence, near where his bike was, walking her dog, a golden retriever. I thought, okay, this is our chance now. So I said to Mitch, follow me. I still think he had no idea what was going on at the time. And years later, he said he did, but he just seemed so oblivious, so calm. So we started running towards the woman, who at this point was kind of directly behind the man, but further back. He was a good 1/4 of the way into the field now. We ran at a funny angle. We didn't want to run directly into him, but we needed to get to that woman. So we kind of ran in a semicircle around him and behind him. I then pointed at the woman. I don't know why, but this made the old man look. He now had noticed her, and that's when I saw him run backwards towards his bike, and not at us. He ran as fast as he could, I imagine, hobbling along. As soon as he reached his bike, he was on it and rode off as fast as he could, in the opposite direction of my house. The whole time, the woman never even looked in our direction. Not once. She had no idea what was going on, but I am positive she stopped something terrible from happening. A hero without even knowing. Mitch and I bolted for the house, which wasn't far from the field, maybe 900 meters in total. And we didn't stop. We just ran. My front door flew open from the force of us running through it. My parents came out of the kitchen, wondering what the hell was the loud crash, then instantly asked me what was wrong. They must have seen the concern on my face, as I told them what happened. My father, being the man that he was, asked what he looked like, and then instantly ran off out the door, looking for him. I sat in my house with Mitch. I was still a bit shaken up. It must have been an hour before my dad returned, and no sign of him. He said he had walked through the fields, and all around the estate. I guess the creep knew better than to stick around. I guess he knew that we were on to him, and he missed his chance. My mom rang Mitch's parents to come pick him up, even though he lived 5 streets up, informed them of what happened. They looked so shocked. We live in such a nice neighborhood. From that day on, we weren't allowed in the fields, and if we did, we had to be supervised by parents at all times. Even going to the store to get sweets was like a military operation. I hated it. But I see now why our parents were so concerned.